morning sun cast a golden hue over the dusty outskirts of a small village. For 12-year-old Ayana, however, there was no warmth in that light. She stood barefoot on the old wooden floor of her grandmother's hut, clad in a delicate white gown that had once belonged to someone else's daughter. Her veil itched against her skin. Her eyes were dry, not because she wasn't sad, but because her body had already run out of tears. Outside, a small crowd gathered, their hushed murmurs swirling in the air like the dust kicked up by light footsteps. Women whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, while men diverted their gaze as if the mere act of looking would betray their beliefs. They all knew what was about to happen. Ayana was about to marry Mr. Elliot Langston, a white man almost 6 times her age. He served as a foreign investor, a retired American with a wealth so profound that it cast shadows over the community. A man with silver hair, cold eyes, and a handshake that made her skin crawl. But he had money, and Ayana's family had none. 2 weeks ago, her little brother, Obasi, fell inexplicably ill. Fever, chills, and uncontrollable seizures that seemed to draw the life from his tiny body. The local clinic refused to admit him without payment. They said hope wasn't enough to treat a sick child without funds to support the care. Ayana's mother had pleaded, begged, and sold everything she could. Her sewing machine, her wedding ring, even Ayana's school books. But it was all for naught. That was when Elliot Langston came into their lives. The villagers whispered that he was an old investor from America, staying in a private lodge on a nearby mountain. No one knew why he was in their region. He wasn't a missionary, nor did he speak of God or charity, but he had cash. When he saw Ayana walking barefoot through the market, clutching coins to buy medicine for her brother, something in his gaze lingered, a spark that ignited an unspoken understanding. The next day, he showed up at their home with a proposal, a bride price large enough to cover Obasi's treatment and enough left over for rent, food, and clothing for an entire year. Ayana's mother had refused at first, her shock turning to fury, her screams echoing off the mud walls. But as Obasi's fever worsened and desperation clawed at their throats, Ayana whispered the words, "I'll do it." The ceremony that followed was small and hastily arranged. It was less a celebration and more an act of survival. Her grandmother tied a thin thread of beads around her neck, a semblance of tradition amidst the chaos. Elliot wore an expensive black suit, and when asked if he took Ayana as his wife, he simply replied with a nod. There was no kiss, no passionate moment, just silence that hung heavily in the air. That night, Ayana found herself sitting on the edge of a clean bed in a guest house that felt foreign, a world away from her grandmother's hut. Elliot sat across from her, engrossed in a book written in a language she couldn't understand. For the first time, he looked directly at her and offered, "You should eat," while handing her a bowl of soup. His voice was gentle, too gentle, and that confused her. He didn't touch her, didn't demand anything, simply locked the door between them from his side. All night, Ayana stayed awake, clutching a tattered photo of her brother and wondering, what does he want from me, if not what all the others whispered? The days that followed were the strangest Ayana had ever experienced. She had expected cruelty, forced obedience, silence, but instead, Elliot treated her with a delicacy that felt foreign. He offered her a room of her own, clean dresses, and a special tea served at exactly 4 p.m. each day. He never once raised his voice, never cast her a leering glance, never treated her like the others had, and that somehow made everything worse. She didn't know what to expect anymore. On the third night, she peered through the cracked door of the large library. Elliot was there, as always, seated in a brown armchair, bathed in the golden light of an old lamp. But this time, there was something strange. He was staring into a mirror, not shaving or brushing his hair, just silent, staring. His face looked tired, paler than usual, and his lips trembled slightly as if he were whispering something under his breath. Ayana couldn't hear. She backed away quietly, a chill settling in her stomach. The next morning, Elliot invited her on a walk through the forest trail behind the lodge. He gave her a pair of boots, a scarf, and a notebook. "You should write," he said, "even if it's just your thoughts." Ayana squinted. "Why?" "Because stories make sense of things." He paused, then added quietly, "And I think you'll need that soon." The way he said it sent chills racing down her spine. By the 5th day, Ayana realized Elliot kept a room locked at the far end of the hallway, a heavy wooden door with a brass handle that didn't budge. She asked him about it once, and he smiled faintly. "Some doors aren't ready to open yet." But Ayana wasn't a naive child anymore. She had been poor, seen death, and said goodbye to innocence the day she donned a wedding dress meant for someone 3 times her age. The night Elliot left for town, she picked the lock. Inside, she found a museum of secrets. Photographs lined the walls, children, dozens of them, all from different countries, some smiling, some not. Beneath each frame was a date. Some had an X marked over them, others had none. In a corner of the room stood an old wooden trunk. Inside it lay more notebooks and letters. She pulled one out. "Dear Marisol, you're probably 17 now. I still think about you. I hope you kept the violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon." Another letter read, "To Chica. The stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your mother. I hope you still sing." And one more, fresh and barely a week old. "To Ayana, you don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real." Her breath caught in her throat. Why was her name here? Why had he written her a goodbye letter before she even found it? Then, without warning, she turned and nearly screamed. Elliot stood in the doorway, having returned earlier than expected. His expression was not angry, just tired. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said slowly. Ayana clutched the letter to her chest. "Knew what?" Elliot leaned against the door frame, exhaling heavily. "That I didn't marry you for me," he said. "I married you for you." Ayana felt frozen in place, still holding the letter. The heavy air in the room was laced with cedarwood and faded memories. Elliot stepped inside, gently closing the door behind him. He didn't scold her for unlocking it. He didn't ask why. Instead, he walked to one of the photographs on the wall. The image of a girl in a cheerful yellow dress, laughing, her arms flung wide beneath a blossoming tree. "Her name was Amira," he said quietly. "From Morocco. She had a stutter, but when she read poetry, you'd swear God himself was speaking through her." He smiled faintly, but the moment didn't last long. "She died at 14. Malaria. Her village had no clean water." He pointed to another, "Leon from southern China, abandoned at birth. I paid for her surgeries. She dreamed of becoming a nurse. She didn't make it either." Ayana's mouth quivered. "Are these all girls you married?" "No," he said firmly. "They were all girls. I found girls in danger, girls being sold, forgotten, thrown away. I didn't marry any of them." He turned to face her fully. "You're the first." Ayana narrowed her eyes, confusion flooding her thoughts. "Then why me?" Elliot eased himself into a small chair with a sigh that bore the weight of decades. "Because you were going to be married off anyway. You just didn't know it yet?" Her heart dropped. He continued, "I'd heard rumors in the village. A foreign businessman, Russian, had been buying wives under the table, girls even younger than you. Your family was in debt. He was going to come to your mother with an offer." Ayana stumbled back. "You're lying." "I wish I were." His voice cracked, barely audible. "I knew I had only 2 options. Let that man get to you, or get there before him." Ayana looked again at the walls. These photos weren't trophies. They were memorials. For the next hour, Elliot recounted everything. His life's mission of helping vulnerable girls, the lengths he went to protect them, how he often worked silently, off the record. Ayana interrupted him once with a question that burned in her chest. "Why not use your money publicly? Build an organization, a school. You're rich, right?" He smiled bitterly. "I was. I sold most of my assets to fund these missions. But even money has limits in a world where the powerful are protected and the poor are punished. I learned early on the only way to reach girls like you, trapped in places the world forgot, was to go there myself." He looked into her eyes, his gaze fierce. "I married you because that was the only way I could buy time for you, to protect you, to give you a choice you were never going to have." That night, Ayana couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, legs pulled to her chest, letter still cradled in her hands. Thoughts drifted through her mind, filled with the life she almost lived, about the quiet man who had offered her a contract instead of a command, a pin instead of a cage, a choice instead of chains. And she realized something profound that made her chest ache. He didn't save her because he had to. He saved her because no one else would. The following morning, she awoke to a stillness that felt unnatural. Elliot was absent from breakfast, the garden bench, and even the library. Ayana's heart began to race as she knocked on his bedroom door. No response. Her hand trembled as she slowly opened it. Elliot was there, lying peacefully on his side, still dressed in his robe, pale yet beautiful in a way that seemed to illuminate the shadows around him. He lay quiet, too quiet. The doctors would later say it was congestive heart failure. He had known it was coming. That was why he had raced to marry her. He didn't want to leave this world without giving one last girl a second chance. Inside his bedside drawer, Ayana discovered a sealed envelope addressed to her. It read, "Ayana, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's time for you to live yours. You'll find documents in the study. Your name is now on everything I own. Land, savings, property. But the most important thing I leave you isn't money. It's freedom. Don't waste it." She wept for the first time, not out of fear, but out of love. Word of Elliot Langston's death spread quickly. At first, it was quiet, a whisper among the large staff, a call to a lawyer in the city. Then, it moved like wildfire through the village. People came to the front gate with flowers, folded hands, and questions they dared not ask aloud. But what no one expected was the will. In the days that followed, a lawyer named Miss Barrow showed up in a black car, clutching a sealed portfolio. Inside was a handwritten testament, notarized and legally binding. Ayana, barely 12 years old, was listed as Elliot's sole heir. The villagers were stunned. Some whispered blessings, others muttered curses. Her mother fainted in the yard. The elders met in secret, while children pointed from alleyways, wondering how a girl like her could own so much now. Just last week, she was a poor nobody. Her heart heavy, Ayana said nothing. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She sat quietly, much like Elliot had once taught her, listening. Inside the lodge, she found solace. The library was filled with books whispering stories. The kitchen offered warmth, and the silence that once felt daunting became a welcoming embrace. Elliot's lawyer, Miss Barrow, returned on the third day with more transition documents, explaining gently, "There's enough money to last you until university and beyond. We'll need to name a guardian to oversee the estate until you're of age." Ayana looked up and asked, "Do I have to leave?" "No," Miss Barrow replied, surprised. "This house is yours. Elliot made it clear. You can stay as long as you like." Ayana sat back, the truth crashing over her like waves. She had her own bed, her own books, her own keys, and now her own decisions. The first one she made shocked everyone. Rather than indulging in her own wealth, she directed part of Elliot's remaining funds toward the children of the village, those who were once marginalized, like herself. She ordered repairs for the clinic that had rejected Obasi. She funded a school erected where she once sold herbs amidst the dust, and she proposed laws that protected any girl under the age of 14 from being married off without her consent. Some villagers labeled her dangerous, others called her cursed, but soon they began referring to her with a new title, the girl who came back with fire. One bright afternoon, Ayana took a solitary stroll to the cemetery that hugged the edge of town. With a photo frame in hand, Elliot's favorite, the one capturing the moment beneath the blossom tree, she placed it beside his gravesite and whispered, "You weren't my husband. You were never even my father. You were my lighthouse." The wind rustled through the nearby trees, whispering secrets of resilience and remembrance. Weeks turned into months, and the lodge became a sanctuary, a place where young girls could read, where they could sleep peacefully without fear, where they could heal. Some had been rescued from fate worse than death. Others came with stories of survival. Fatima, aged 9, had escaped a forced engagement. Benta, only 11, had been hiding from an abusive uncle. They found their way to Ayana's gates, and she welcomed them in, no longer as a queen, nor as a savior, but as one of them. Then, one rainy evening, Ayana found a final envelope hidden inside one of Elliot's old book covers. It read simply, "If they come for you, don't be afraid." With trembling hands, she opened it slowly. Inside was a list, names, dates, addresses. Dozens of men, government officials, diplomats, criminals, many involved in child marriage, trafficking, and the underworld of corruption, Elliot had been combating for decades. At the bottom of the letter was a final handwritten plea. "Use your voice, Ayana. Burn the dark. They can't kill light when it knows who it is." In that moment, Ayana made her second decision. She wouldn't just build homes, she'd build a movement. 1 year later, the world knew her name, Ayana Langston, no longer a child bride in a forgotten village, but a global voice advocating for girls like herself. Her story detonated across social media when a journalist from Lagos investigated rumors of a 12-year-old inheriting a foreign man's estate. What they uncovered was far more than just headlines. They found a revolution in the making. Ayana had not only grown taller, but had also grown stronger. Her voice remained soft, but now when she spoke, ministers listened. When she wrote, people shared. When she entered a courtroom, traffickers flinched. With Elliot's list and Miss Barrow's support, Ayana launched the Langston Report, an exhaustive, terrifying dossier that exposed international child marriage networks, politicians who took bribes, and villages that auctioned off their daughters behind closed doors. Some people tried silencing her, threatening, hacking, lying, but it was too late. Elliot hadn't just left her a house, he'd left her proof, a blueprint of hope. Survivors began reaching out, young girls who had endured the same fates Ayana had narrowly escaped. She listened to their voices, validating their stories and uniting them under a shared purpose. The movement blossomed beyond what she could have imagined, empowering girls not just locally, but globally. A beacon for change, Ayana transformed what had once seemed a shadowy past into a powerful future, illuminating paths for countless others. "I will never be forgotten," she declared, staring into the camera at a press conference, her voice steady. "With each step forward, we push back against the darkness. Together, we rise." Those words echoed far beyond the walls of the conference room, igniting a fire that few could extinguish. And as Ayana stood firmly, she wasn't merely fighting for herself, but the countless girls who would never need to wear a wedding dress, meant for someone 3 times their age again. In the end, she had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Power isn't something to be taken, but rather something that comes alive when others are given their freedom. From the ashes of despair, Ayana Langston had risen, a light in the dark, a voice for the voiceless, a lighthouse guiding the way for those still navigating the tumultuous seas of their own lives.